Hello there, and welcome to my channel. I'm so glad you're here. Whether you're winding down or drifting off, this space is your quiet corner to rest and wonder. If you enjoy calming stories and slow adventures through history, a like and subscribe mean the world. Now let's settle in and explore tonight's story together. The sea was calm that night, too calm. A vast, endless sheet of ink under a canopy of 1,000 stars. And cutting through that silence, the proud silhouette of the USS Indianapolis, her decks glowing faintly beneath the moonlight. No alarms, no warnings, only the hum of engines and the rhythmic slap of waves against steel. 196 men aboard. Most were young, sailors who believed the war was nearly over, dreaming of home, of familiar faces, of peace finally within reach. But at 12:14 a.m., July 30th, 1945, the ocean erupted. 2 torpedoes struck from the darkness, explosions tearing through the hull, flames consuming the decks, men thrown screaming into the sea. Within 12 minutes, the pride of the Pacific was gone, swallowed whole by the same calm water she had ruled hours before. No distress call, no rescue, just silence. And for 5 days, nearly 1,000 men would drift, burned, bleeding, and hunted, waiting for help that never came. This is the story of the USS Indianapolis, a mission that helped end the war, and a tragedy that haunted America forever. Before the flames and the fear, there was pride. The USS Indianapolis, CA-35, wasn't just another ship. She was a legend forged in steel and courage. Commissioned in 1932, she gleamed like a floating fortress. 9 8-inch guns, armor that could deflect death itself, and a crew that called her home. For over a decade, the Indianapolis carried presidents, hosted admirals, and led fleets across the world's oceans. She was President Roosevelt's ship of state, the vessel that carried him to Pearl Harbor, and later, to the front lines of destiny. By 1945, she had become a veteran of countless battles, from the bloody reefs of the Pacific to the smoldering skies of Okinawa. Each scar on her hull told a story, each patch of rust a memory etched in salt and fire. When the final mission orders came, there was no fanfare, no ceremony. Just a sealed envelope and a command: deliver the cargo, top secret, no escort, no delay. The crew didn't know what they were carrying, into only that it was vital. Inside the Indianapolis lay the heart of a weapon that would change the world forever. Components of the atomic bomb Little Boy. It was a mission of triumph, but it would become a voyage of ghosts. The summer of 1945 burned hot across the Pacific. Japan's empire was collapsing, yet the war refused to die. Every island, every harbor, every mile of ocean still demanded blood. In the midst of that chaos, the USS Indianapolis received orders that glowed with secrecy. Few men on board knew the truth. Fewer still would live to tell it. Captain Charles Butler McVay III, a seasoned officer of quiet authority, opened the sealed envelope alone in his cabin. His face changed as he read, not with fear but with understanding. This was no ordinary mission. They would sail from San Francisco to Tinian Island, carrying a metal cylinder barely larger than a torpedo. Inside that crate lay uranium-235, the core of the first atomic bomb, the weapon that would erase Hiroshima. To ensure silence, the Navy gave strict orders: sail alone. No escort, no distress call unless attacked. Even among his officers, McVay could only hint, "We are delivering something that could end the war." On July 16th, the ship slipped quietly under the Golden Gate Bridge, her crew laughing, unaware they were vanishing into history. The Pacific shimmered under the moonlight, the vast calm before the storm. They raced at 29 knots, faster than any Japanese submarine could track. The mission was smooth, efficient, flawless. On July 26, 1945, the Indianapolis reached Tinian and offloaded her deadly cargo. Mission accomplished. The sailors cheered, thinking they were heading home. But history had written a crueler ending. What followed would not be remembered for triumph, but for survival against the impossible. The USS Indianapolis left Tinian under a moonless sky. Her mission complete, her secret delivered, and her crew in high spirits. The Pacific stretched endlessly, calm, vast, deceptively gentle. It was July 29th, 1945. The sea was like glass. The stars hung motionless, their reflections trembling in the waves. Most of the 1,196 men were asleep, scattered in hammocks and bunks across the ship. Only the watch crew stood awake, lulled by the rhythm of engines and the faint whisper of wind. Far below, hidden beneath that black water, Lieutenant Commander Mochitsura Hashimoto waited, captain of the Japanese submarine I-58. He had spent weeks prowling the ocean, hunting shadows, desperate for one last strike before Japan's surrender. Through his periscope, he spotted the faint silhouette of a cruiser slicing the horizon. The hunter's instinct took over. He whispered the firing commands with a calm precision born from years of war. Torpedo. Ready? Set depth. 4 meters. Fire! At 12:14 a.m., 6 torpedoes raced through the Pacific, their deadly wakes invisible in the darkness. Seconds later, a flash, then thunder. The first torpedo struck the bow, tearing open the forward magazine. Fire rolled across the deck, consuming everything in a single breath. The second torpedo hit amidships, splitting the Indianapolis's spine. The lights flickered once, then died. Men were thrown from their bunks into walls of flame and steel. Water surged in through the ruptured hull, flooding compartments faster than anyone could react. Captain McVay, barefoot and half-blinded by smoke, gave the only order he could. Abandon ship. Within 12 minutes, the proud cruiser that had carried the world's most powerful weapon was gone, swallowed by the very ocean she had ruled. 900 men were cast into the Pacific's black embrace. No one knew where they were. No one was coming. The ocean was silent again. Where moments ago there had been steel and thunder, now there was only the hiss of bubbles and the distant crackle of burning oil. 900 men floated in darkness, scattered across the Pacific like drifting ghosts. Many wore no life jackets. Some clung to debris, others to each other. The heat of the explosion still burned their skin, yet the water around them was turning cold, indifferent. At first there was disbelief. No distress signal had gone out. No one knew they were missing. They were alone. Utterly alone. The survivors gathered in small groups, drawn together by instinct. They spoke in low voices, calling out names that faded into the night. Men prayed, cursed, laughed hysterically, anything to silence the thought that no rescue was coming. By sunrise, the vast blue calm looked almost beautiful. The fire was gone. The sea shimmered with oil, reflecting the dawn like broken glass. The men squinted against the light, realizing they could now see. And that meant something else could see them too. At first, it was a shadow below the surface. Then another. Then fins, the sharks had come. Silky sharks, drawn by the scent of blood and oil circling in growing numbers. At first they only bumped the men, curious. By noon the feeding had begun. The ocean that had seemed merciful became a nightmare. Screams echoed across the water, sudden, sharp, then gone. Survivors formed tight circles, kicking at the water, praying it would keep the predators away. Hours turned to days. The sun blazed by day, burning their flesh. The cold gripped them by night. Salt water tore at their throats as thirst drove some mad enough to drink the very thing that was killing them. Hallucinations spread. Men claimed they saw islands, ships, even Jesus walking on the waves. Most followed those visions and never returned. The ocean had no mercy left. It devoured the strong, the faithful, the innocent alike. And yet, in the middle of that endless blue inferno, small clusters of men still clung to life, whispering promises to each other. Just one more sunrise. By the second day, the Pacific was quiet again. No screams now, no thrashing water, just the low hum of wind and the slap of waves against bodies that no longer moved. The ocean had become a graveyard. The men who remained alive drifted among the dead, unable to look away, unable to swim far. Each new sunrise revealed more lifeless forms, faces of friends now empty, bobbing on the swells beside them. Some began to whisper to the corpses as if they were still listening. Others stared blankly at the horizon, their minds already gone. Salt sores covered their lips, tongues swollen from thirst. The water around them shimmered with oil, rainbow hues masking the stench of decay. The sharks didn't hunt anymore, they patrolled. Their fins cut through the surface like black knives, moving in slow circles, unhurried, patient. The survivors stopped trying to fight them. They just prayed not to be next. Pete, one of the older sailors, began to talk softly about home, his daughter's laughter, the sound of rain on tin roofs, the smell of bread in the morning. He spoke as if it were happening now, as if by speaking he could summon it into being. The others listened, half awake, half dreaming. For a moment the sea seemed peaceful again. Then the hallucinations came. Men reached for phantom canteens, swore they saw planes overhead, even swam toward mirages of ships that shimmered just beyond reach. The Pacific was playing tricks now. Beautiful, cruel tricks. At dusk, a crimson glow spread across the sky. It looked like land, but it wasn't. It was the reflection of a burning sun sinking slowly, dragging the last of their hope with it. By nightfall, the stars came out, 1,000,000 of them, bright and close. Too beautiful for such a place, and as the waves rocked them gently, the men realized the sea wasn't their enemy anymore. It was simply waiting, waiting for silence. Night fell like a curtain drawn over the living and the dead. The survivors floated in near blackness, the kind of darkness where the ocean and sky merged into one endless void. Only the stars remained, their reflections trembling on the water, forming constellations of ghosts. Jack heard it first, a whisper, faint but distinct. "Over here." He froze, scanning the waves. Nothing. Then again, closer this time. It wasn't the sea and it wasn't the wind. It was a voice. Others began to hear it too, soft, beckoning, human. Some said it was the voices of those they'd lost calling them home. Others thought it was rescue, a radio from a nearby ship distorted by distance. But the rational part of their minds, what little remained, knew better. The Pacific was speaking. Hunger, thirst, and trauma had cracked their sanity like fragile glass. Men whispered to unseen comrades, argued with the dead, and begged invisible rescuers to throw down ropes. One sailor started laughing uncontrollably, shouting to a passing cloud, "We're saved, boys! The Indianapolis is back." He dove beneath the surface and never came up. Pete tried to hold the group together. "Stay calm," he rasped. "It's the dehydration talking. Nobody moves." But even his words carried no authority now. They sounded more like prayers. Hours passed, marked only by the sloshing of the sea. Then a sound, a real one this time, a distant rumble, low and rhythmic. "Engines, do you hear that?" Jack whispered. The others lifted their heads weakly. Yes, it was faint but unmistakable, the growl of propellers somewhere beyond the horizon. For a moment, hope returned, fragile and flickering like the stars above. Men wept, laughed, clutched one another. Some even began to swim, pushing toward the sound. But the night gave no answer. The noise faded into the distance, leaving only silence and the sound of waves. The voices returned soon after, softer now, almost kind. And in that darkness, it was impossible to tell anymore which voices were real, and which were the seas. The next morning arrived not with sunrise but with color. After 4 endless nights of gray and black, the world slowly turned gold again. The sea, once cruel and infinite, began to shimmer like polished glass beneath the dawn. Jack's eyes opened to the sound of someone whispering, "Light. There's light." At first he thought it was another hallucination, but then, through salt-encrusted lashes, he saw it. A faint streak of orange piercing the horizon, cutting through the mist like a divine hand parting clouds. "Sunrise," Pete muttered, barely able to move his cracked lips. "We made it to morning." The survivors floated silently, each man caught between life and death, too weak even to celebrate. The ocean stretched flat and endless, until suddenly a distant droning filled the air. Low, steady, mechanical. Jack raised his head, every muscle screaming in protest. "Plane!" he rasped. "There's a plane!" At first nobody believed him. Then the sound grew louder. A Lockheed Ventura patrol bomber, glinting like a silver bird against the morning sky. "Signal him," Pete croaked. "Anything shiny, use it." One sailor tore off his belt buckle, flashing it desperately toward the sun. Another waved a piece of wet fabric until his arms gave out. Jack, using the last of his strength, splashed the water in rhythmic bursts, a signal he'd once seen in naval training. For a moment, the plane flew on. Then it banked. The pilot, Lieutenant Wilbur Gwynn, had spotted something. Circling lower, he peered through binoculars and froze. Below him, the ocean was scattered with tiny black dots. Men, hundreds of them, drifting among slicks of oil. He grabbed the radio. "Base, this is Ventura 2-1. Survivors in the water. Repeat, survivors in the water." "Looks like the Indianapolis." The words echoed through the static like a miracle spoken aloud. Down below, the men screamed. Weak, broken, delirious, but alive. For the first time in 5 days, the sky had answered. The sky roared with life once again. For 5 endless days, the survivors of USS Indianapolis had stared upward into emptiness, praying for something, anything that moved. Now the heavens were filled with the sound of engines, propellers slicing through the thick Pacific air like salvation itself. The first rescue aircraft, a PBY Catalina seaplane, appeared on the horizon just after noon. Its silver body gleamed against the blue expanse, sunlight flashing across its wings like a blade of mercy. From below, the men raised trembling hands, shouting until their throats tore raw. Inside the cockpit, Lieutenant Adrian Marks scanned the ocean below and froze. The water was a field of faces, dozens, then hundreds, scattered across miles. Tiny black shapes bobbing amid slicks of oil and drifting debris. "Dear God," he whispered, "they're everywhere." Breaking every standing order, Marks made a decision that would define his life. "Prepare for a water landing," he said. The crew stared. "Sir, the sea's too rough." "I said prepare." The Catalina hit the water hard, skipping across the swells before slamming down with a metallic groan. Miraculously, it stayed afloat. Marks threw open the hatch, shouting to the men below, "This is Navy Air. We've got you, hang on." One by one, survivors were hauled aboard. Burned, bitten, delirious, half dead but breathing. There was no room left, so Marks ordered his crew to strap the rest to the wings, securing them with belts, ropes, and even radio wires. The Catalina became an angelic lifeboat, floating amid hell itself. Above them, rescue aircraft dropped rafts, food, and medical kits. Below, sharks circled the wreckage, confused by the sudden fury of human presence. By nightfall, destroyers arrived, guided by flares from Marks's plane. The sea that had swallowed hundreds was now releasing its grip. As sailors pulled the last few men aboard the USS Doyle, the captain ordered the deck lights dimmed out of respect. The ocean was quiet again, broken only by the sobs of those who survived. For 316 men, salvation had come from the sky. For nearly 900 others, the sea kept their names forever. The Pacific was calm again. Its stillness mocked the horror it had just witnessed. For the 316 survivors of the USS Indianapolis, the nightmare didn't end when they were pulled from the sea. It simply changed shape. On the decks of the rescue ships, men lay wrapped in blankets, their eyes wide and unblinking. Some wept quietly, others stared into nothing. Many whispered names, friends, brothers, shipmates, lost to the sharks, the salt, the silence. Medical officers moved among them with morphine and soft words, but no one could truly soothe the wounds that weren't visible. When one sailor asked a medic, "How many of us made it?" As the reply came like a blow, 316. The number hung in the air, an impossible fraction of the nearly 1,200 who had left Guam alive. Lieutenant Commander Charles McVay, their captain, stood apart, alive but hollow. He'd been rescued days later, gaunt and sunburned, his voice reduced to a whisper. He asked for his men before food, before rest, before anything. When he learned how few survived, he said nothing, just lowered his head. Back in Pearl Harbor, the Navy was silent. No announcement, no mourning. It took nearly 2 weeks before the public even learned that one of America's mightiest cruisers had vanished. To many it felt like betrayal, that even in survival truth had drowned. Families waited for telegrams that would never come. Wives received only vague condolences. Mothers clutched photographs that would never age. And McVay, though found innocent of malice, was court-martialed for hazarding his ship. The same man who had gone down with his command now carried its ghost on land. Years later, survivors gathered for reunions. They spoke softly of the screams, the sharks, the long days beneath a pitiless sun. But when asked what haunted them most, the answer was always the same. The sound of the water at night, because the ocean never forgot. And neither did they. The survivors had barely begun to heal when another storm rose. One not of waves, but of politics. Captain Charles Butler McVay III, commander of the USS Indianapolis, was summoned to Washington. Still gaunt from dehydration and trauma, he stood before a naval tribunal that demanded not gratitude, but blame. The question was not how the system failed him and his men. It was how he had failed the system. The charge, hazarding his ship by failing to zigzag. It was a maneuver meant to confuse submarines, but the truth was grimly simple. The Japanese submarine I-58, commanded by Mochitsura Hashimoto, had fired from point-blank range. No amount of zigzagging could have saved them. And yet the Navy needed a scapegoat. They needed someone to hold accountable for the loss of 879 American lives. They needed to protect reputations higher up the chain of command. So they called the enemy captain, Hashimoto himself, to testify against McVay. The irony was unbearable. A Japanese officer stood in an American courtroom, declaring under oath, "Zigzagging would have made no difference. I would have sunk him anyway." But the verdict had already been written. McVay was found guilty, the decorated officer, now branded as the man who led his crew to their deaths. When the survivors heard, some broke down in rage. They'd seen him risk everything to save them, walking barefoot across burning decks to help the wounded. He had gone down with the ship and nearly drowned before being rescued. And now his own nation had drowned him again. Years passed. The weight never left his shoulders. Letters from grieving families haunted his mailbox. Some cursed him. Others begged for answers he didn't have. In 1968, unable to carry the ghosts any longer, Charles McVay took his own life, sitting on his front porch with his Navy-issued revolver and his dog by his side. In his pocket was a small toy sailor, a reminder from one of his lost men's sons. The ocean had taken his ship. The silence had taken his soul. Time has a way of silencing most stories, but the men of the USS Indianapolis were not the kind to forget. Decades passed. The ocean calmed. Ships grew larger. Wars grew smaller in memory. But for the survivors, the nightmare never ended. They still woke to phantom screams, still tasted salt water and oil in their dreams. Each year they gathered in small reunions, gray-haired sailors who had once been boys in hell. They told the same stories, not for pity, but to keep the faces of their shipmates alive. And every gathering ended the same way, with someone saying, "We have to clear the captain's name." They wrote letters. They called congressmen. They sent testimonies, affidavits, and personal accounts. For 50 years their fight wasn't just against history. It was against indifference. Then came Hunter Scott, an 11-year-old boy from Florida, who changed everything. He'd watched the movie Jaws, where a scene mentioned the sinking of the Indianapolis, and something about it stayed with him. For a school history project, he started interviewing survivors. One story became 10, then 100. He compiled evidence, timelines, Navy logs, and uncovered what many adults had chosen to ignore. Captain McVay was innocent. When Hunter presented his findings to Congress, the old sailors stood behind him, weeping openly. A child had done what decades of bureaucracy refused to. In 2000, the United States Congress officially exonerated Captain Charles Butler McVay III. The verdict was overturned. Honor, though delayed, was finally restored. At the next reunion, there were fewer men than before, but the mood was different. No longer burdened by guilt or rage, they raised their glasses and whispered, "For the skipper." In the quiet that followed, the ocean seemed to exhale, as if releasing ghosts long held beneath the waves. Justice had come not from admirals or generals, but from loyalty, persistence, and a boy who believed the truth still mattered. For 72 years, the sea kept her secret. Beneath the rolling blue vastness of the Pacific, in darkness untouched by light or sound, the USS Indianapolis lay silent, a ghost ship entombed in the deep. Then, in August 2017, a research vessel led by billionaire Paul Allen detected a massive metallic shape resting 18,000 feet below the surface. Sonar scans confirmed it. The wreck of the USS Indianapolis had finally been found. The discovery was met not with celebration, but with tears. For the families of the 879 men who never returned, it was like hearing a voice long thought gone, a whisper rising from the deep, saying, "We're home." Cameras revealed the ship's torn hull, coral growing where steel once gleamed, a strange beauty in the wreckage. The letters INDIANAPOLIS, still visible through the silt and time. Even after 7 decades, the ocean had remembered. Survivors, what few still lived, watched the footage in silence. Some smiled, some wept. One said softly, "She's standing proud again." And perhaps that's what the sea wanted all along, not to hide the Indianapolis, but to hold her until the world was ready to remember her properly. Today, the name USS Indianapolis stands for more than tragedy. It stands for endurance, for courage under impossible odds, for truth that refuses to drown. As the waves close over her once more, the sunlight flickers across the water, and for a fleeting moment, it looks like the ocean itself is saluting, because some stories don't sink. They just wait. Until we're ready to listen. They were sons, brothers, and fathers, ordinary men asked to do an impossible thing, to sail across the vast Pacific, in a world at war, carrying a weapon that would end one age and begin another. The USS Indianapolis never fired a shot in battle that final mission. Her crew didn't storm beaches or sink fleets. They simply delivered their cargo and vanished into history. But what happened next became one of the greatest tests of human endurance ever told. In the endless blue desert of the Pacific, they clung to debris, fighting sun and salt, hunger and thirst, and the living nightmare of circling fins beneath the waves. Hope became as fragile as the rafts they floated on. But even then, they refused to surrender to the sea. When the rescue planes finally appeared on the horizon, only 316 men remained. And though the ocean took hundreds, it could not take their story. Decades passed. Time buried wounds deeper than the wreck itself. The Navy's silence turned to shame, and shame to reckoning. Until finally truth surfaced. Captain McVay was exonerated. The record was set right, and the world remembered the men of the Indianapolis not as victims, but as heroes who endured the unimaginable. Today, the Indianapolis sleeps in the deep, but she is not gone. Her spirit sails in every vessel that bears the American flag, in every sailor who looks to the horizon and whispers, "Not forgotten." When the sun sinks below the sea and the stars ignite over the Pacific, You can almost imagine them still out there, a silent silhouette on the water, heading home because legends don't vanish. Ships may sink, but courage endures, and somewhere, beneath the waves, the crew of the USS Indianapolis still stands their watch, forever part of the ocean, forever remembered by those who listen to the sea.